Good evening. I'd like to call to order a regular meeting of the Board of Education of the Goshen Central School District. Tonight, Monday, March 20th, 6:30 p.m. Tonight's meeting is being held in the District Administration Building and live streamed through YouTube. Next on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of meditation. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda, I need a motion to enter into executive session. Shannon and Tom. Be it resolved, the Board of Education will enter into executive session with the intent to reconvene the business portion of the meeting for discussions related to the employment history of a particular person or persons. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We will be reconvening the meeting at approximately 7 p.m. Sorry. Can I have a motion to reconvene tonight's business portion of the meeting? Tom and Brett. Next on the agenda is privilege of the floor. I will read through the policy number 3225, privilege of the floor. Persons wishing to speak should first be recognized by the president, then identify themselves. Any group or organization wishing to address the board must identify a single spokesperson. Comments shall be brief and concise, generally not exceeding 2 minutes in length per speaker, which may be extended at the discretion of the board president. Speakers may comment on matters related to district business only. The board will not permit in public session discussions involving individual district personnel or students. Persons wishing to discuss matters involving individual district personnel or students should present their comments and or concerns to the superintendent during regular business hours. All speakers are to conduct themselves in a civil manner. Obscene language, libelous statements, threats of violence, statements advocating racial, religious, or other forms of prejudice will not be tolerated. We do have one person that is signed up, Mr. Robert Fitzpatrick. If you could please approach the podium, there is a button to press, it goes from red to green.
Okay.
And then if you could just restate your name and then you can continue.
My name is Robert Fitzpatrick. Where's the button?
It went red. She was
Green means go, right? Robert Fitzpatrick. I'm the president of Goshen Little League. But first of all, before I go with that, I want to thank the district and the athletic department for always helping us at the Little League. Anything we need, you guys always help. So you're a great community partner. I'm coming to you because my son is a 9th grade student. He played modified baseball last year and he's coming to play JV baseball this year, hopefully. I know Dr. Castellane brought up brought up at the last meeting about the field over there at CJ Hooker. I know it was discussed, the baseball team was here last year. There was a lot of canceled games. That was last May, it's now March. Games start next week. Nothing's been done about the field. The field needs clay. The field needs to be graded. That's stuff that can be done in one day. The field needs to be redone completely, obviously, right? The district has spent a lot of money on athletic facilities and, you know, that's a great thing that we're doing. The baseball fields and the softball fields need some work. However, this field is a desperate need for this season. It needs some clay. It needs to be graded so that way the kids can play and the games don't get canceled unnecessarily. Obviously, if it's pouring, the games are going to get canceled. However, sometimes it rains, it's out for quite a while. So I was hoping that we could get it taken care of sooner rather than later, so we don't have an issue again this year. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Next on the agenda is the president's report. I just had some observations, because I just thought it was really cool and I don't know. I hope that folks realize or see a lot of what we're doing as far as communication, and we're always trying to improve with our communication. But when I took a look, we have the one, and it's sent via text and it's sent, if you'll see it, it's distinguished by saying Goshen Central. And it's, for me, I have a student in the high school. So yes, I do see more of the communication from the high school. But if you really look through it, it's really cool because we're seeing now videos of our students. So I thought that was just, I loved watching that, and I hope that we see more of that. Specifically, I think the one thing was for, I took a picture of it. It was the winter sports captains, what it's like to be a gladiator. So I just like that we were actually seeing the students for a change. We weren't seeing administration, we weren't seeing like a lot of things about steps that need to be taken, different things. So it was fun to see that. Another thing that I thought was really innovative and awesome, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, is it Jolena Dong? I thought that was really cool that we had a student that put together volunteer hours and she put together like, a resource guide. Because as a parent from years ago, trying to find volunteer hours of where you go to, you're always calling somebody. So I thought that was really kind of neat that was in there as well.
Jolena was our student,
Jolena.
she was our representative on our strategic planning committee.
Okay, oh, I think then I probably have met her.
Yeah.
But no, so just good job. I know that there's, all the buildings are doing their own communication, so I could probably be here for a very long time spotlighting what everybody's doing. But I thought that was just really neat and it took about maybe 6 minutes of time for me to go through it all. And I'm on the board and I found out things that I didn't know. So thank you for the principals for making a lot of that communication happen. Next on the agenda, we have our student representative. We have Michael. Thank you.
So in the high school, we had the following athletes on the basketball team who were honored in Division III of the OCIAA. We had Luke Mikowski and Tyson Clark as All-Stars. We had Jaden Rudling, Player of the Year, and Coach D'Angelo as Coach of the Year. The following high school students have placed at the annual Substance Abuse Prevention Poster Contest. We had Lauren Carroll, second place, graphic 7 to 12. Gianna Peters, Savannah Pagoda Martinez, and Sabine Sanchez Castellanos, who all placed in an honorable mention, graphic 7 to 12. The Senior Citizen Banquet hosted by the Interact Club is this weekend. The GHS Musical Drowsy Chaperone is this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. Can I ask a quick question? Are tickets still available at the door for the high school? Do you know, Mr. Pantaleon?
Yes, there.
They are? Okay, great. Thanks. Just in case people, wanted to come out this weekend last week. Next on the agenda is a legislative update, Oxford. Mr. Tom Loftus.
And the big top conversation the past couple of days has been about the letter from Senator Skoufis regarding the proposed changes in the Orange County IDA. It's actually one of the items on the superintendent's report, so I'll defer to Dr. Coates to go into more detail about that. So we'll cover it then.
Thank you, Mr. Loftus. Next on the agenda is the superintendent's report, Dr. Curtis Coates.
Thank you very much. So I'll invite our friends from LAN forward for the presentation of BCS, Mr. Freeze. Back there? You're hiding behind the post, Mr. Freeze, sorry. So, some of our board members, every 5 years, it is required by public school districts in New York State to complete a building condition survey. This is a full and comprehensive look at all of your district facilities, inside and out, upside down and backwards. Our architects and engineers leave no stone unturned. So Lan is here tonight with Mr. Freeze to talk about what is included in the BCS, what did they find this time, and then to just offer some high-level suggestions, and Mr. Freeze will give some clarity about his interaction with Lan throughout the process this time. One thing you will notice, it has been a little bit more than 5 years. So during COVID, there was some allowance to do just what they called an AVI. Do I have to write that yet? Good. Every once in a while I get something wrong. So they're allowed just a brief high-level visual inspection during COVID. We did not have to do a comprehensive view that is typically required on a BCS. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Lan and to Mr. Freeze to walk you through the document that I shared with you over the weekend and the presentation they have here ready for you today. So turn it right over.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Nolamo. I'm the principal of Lan Associates. For those of you who don't know me, I have 3 kids in the school district. We have with us Danielle Farrell, Scott Ziegler. Gerard Associates is our engineering partner in Goshen Central School District. Danielle, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself before we jump in through the agenda?
Hello, Danielle Farrell. I am an architect and assistant vice president at LAN. I'm also a resident and a parent. I have a student at CJ Hooker and at GIS. I've been with LAN for almost 20 years and I do the majority of my work in the K-12 sector.
So we're gonna walk you through the process of a building condition survey. The information we're gonna provide is gonna help you set up your 5-year plan and how you may fund capital improvement projects that are, from our perspective, needed in the district, and then from your perspective, wanted in the district at sometimes. Thank you. So I gave this presentation in Bronxville last week. They have one K through 12 school building. The presentation was about 20 minutes. You have 8 buildings. We're gonna try to keep it to 20 minutes, but I may move really quickly throughout the presentation. Basically, the BCS document is a procedural requirement of the New York State Education Department. And the school district, as Dr. Coates said, is supposed to do this every 5 years. COVID did kind of change the process because everybody was submitting the same 5-year plan at the same interval. So they started to stagger the submissions so that it made it a little bit easier on SED to handle and process them.
Yeah, so the last time that you had a building condition survey was in 2015. It used to be every 5, so 2005, 2010, 2015. So you did have a annual visual inspection, which is the AVI in 2020. So from this, you're supposed to be able to pretty much assess what the state of the conditions of the buildings are. So that's the buildings and the sites and so on. And from that, we can create a 5-year plan, which will help you plan your next 5 years worth of projects. So I'm gonna walk you through what our process is on this and then give you a little bit of insight as to what the state requires and then what we give you. So in our preliminary stage, we assemble a team. So there was 2 architects from LAN and there was 2 engineers from Gerard Associates. We reviewed the BCS from 2015 and then also the annual visual inspection. And we identified the work that was deferred from the previous reports. So just to give you an example, you had $75 million worth of needs identified in 2015. You didn't do $75 million worth of work. You had other programmatic changes that you took care of as part of your other referendums, and some of that work is deferred. That's normal for most schools. You kind of go through and you identify the things that need to be done that has the highest priorities, and then some of that does get deferred. So we took all of the deferred work and we included it still because it still needs to be done. And then we identified more work that needed to be done. So we scheduled all of our site visits with Mr. Freeze during July and August when the schools were empty. We met with Mr. Freeze and the head custodial staff of each of the schools. We find that we get the best input from that staff. They know that the roof has been leaking in a 1962 edition, and they know that the boiler is, 30 years old and doesn't owe you anything. So we get a lot of input from them. And then we also start to go over any problematic systems that they may have. Then we performed all of the walkthroughs. So we walked every single roof, we walked around all the buildings into every room, and we identified all of the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing needs as well. And the deadline to get all of that done was December 31st of 2022. So that's your 2022 deadline. So we also took a lot of photo documents, and if you saw the reports that we gave you, there's a lot of photos in there. We found that it's best to look at, if you haven't been on the roofs yourselves, it's best to have photos of that. So we try to document as much as we can. Then we went back across the street and next door and we analyzed all of the information. And we compared it again against the old BCSs, and we identified potential maintenance and capital improvement projects. That's important because some of the work can be done with the maintenance contract or through a maintenance budget. And then some of the work will require capital improvements. We met with the district and we met with Mr. Freeze a few times. Then we went into the reporting phase. So the NYSED forms, we have to fill out one for each school, and I'll give you a little insight in the next slide on that. And then we prepared our written reports with our photographs. And we started to assign costs to each of the items that we identified. We met with the district again, and we categorized a few things that we'll have Mr. Freeze discuss a little bit. And that brings us to today. So today we're meeting with you, we're giving you an overview, and we then will look to get some input from the facilities committee and also just other key stakeholders and administrators to see if there's other changes programmatically or changes in pedagogy that you want to include in any future work. And then we will finalize our recommendations and we will sort our 5-year cost estimate so that things that we identify with today's dollars that we don't decide to do until 4 years out have the proper escalation.
I would say this, I have to add, looking at a BCS and a 5-year plan for the first time, if you're a new board member, is a bit overwhelming. The costs seem completely out of reach with your budget, completely out of reach with your means. Every district we do this presentation, there is somebody who leaves with their mouth open saying, how are we gonna do this? And we don't have a good answer for that. We're going to identify more work than you can afford to fund taking care of in the next 20 years. It's just the reality of school buildings. The school buildings here in particular, some are 80, 90 years old. So I just want to confront that reality and say now, don't worry so much about the total magnitude of what you're trying to undertake. We're going to give you some information. We're going to give you some good funding principles and practices and suggest some, we're going to give you some recommendations from our professional experience. It will be up to you to decide how you want to tackle those problems.
So the SED reports themselves, they're usually about 60 pages. And they'll take each system of the building and they require us to give it a rating. So it's either excellent, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, non-conforming, or critical failure. So we have to go through and do that. So an example up there is ceilings. First they'll ask, is there a ceiling in the building? Yes, there's a ceiling in the building. And we have to then give it an overall rating. So what's difficult about that is you might have a newer building or a newer wing where you've replaced the ceilings, but then you might have a third floor on another wing that has the roof has been leaking and has water staining that you need to replace. So these reports unfortunately don't let us get detailed enough to identify the work that needs to be done. So that's why we go the step further and write the reports with all the photos so that you really can use that as a long-range planning tool. Because these reports, it's really just checking off the box. And as much as we try to put extra information into the comments section, there's really just not enough room. So this gives you an example of the reports that we do, and we try to, like I said, take photos and correlate that and cross-reference back to the reports. And this is more than just the checking of the box. This really starts to give you a paragraph per each item so that you can start to get an idea of what the condition is and then cross-reference and look and see the photos. And then when we're, saying, okay, the 2001 roof needs to be replaced, then you can kind of have something visually to go along with that. So with working with Mr. Freeze, he wanted us to go an extra step to categorize even further to really identify work that could be done as routine maintenance. So I'm just going to give you the ideas of the categories here, and then if Mr. Freeze has anything to add, I'll let him do that. Category 1 is material physical deficiencies. So these are items that need to be done. They typically cannot be done as a minor repair or as maintenance. They really need to be a capital project, and these usually require priority attention. Then we have improvements or enhancements due to program needs, pretty self-explanatory, and or needs based on functional obsolescence. So that's your end of life things. That's your boiler that's getting to the end of its life that you need to start planning to be replaced. Then we have category C, which is routine maintenance. That is work that could be done under maintenance contract, could be done in-house. It really starts to take those, $1,000 to $5,000 things and makes them so that you're not putting them on a overall bond and paying for them over 10 years. Then we have category D, which is actually material physical deficiencies like category A, but they're under the threshold of the 35,000 or an aggregate under the 100,000.
Jim?
Good.
Anything else to add?
Yeah, that's good. The only thing I wanted to add is that Lan was hired to do a BCS and a 5-year plan. But the board has an obligation to also have a comprehensive maintenance program and a long-range plan as well. And so my thought was to try to articulate or communicate to the board and the community the costs that might end up in one of those 3 types of categories. And so to do that, I just advocated for splitting it up this way, where the efficiencies that can be remedied under routine maintenance might be part of a comprehensive maintenance program, if properly funded. And it gives us a little more leeway to think about how we can maybe tackle all these observations. So in 2015, as Danielle mentioned, there's 75 million that we didn't chip away too much at. But I would like to just say one other thing about material physical deficiencies is that if you let go long enough, they become critical failures. Critical failures means you don't get to use that space. We have to go under emergency to fix it. It's just a place that we don't want to be in. So my hope is that at some point we can meet offline as a group and collaborate where we can, help in any way that we can to form a plan for maintenance, for a 5-year plan, and what we want to do maybe 5, 10, 20 years out. And see what that looks like and, and then work from there. Thank you.
Yeah, so 550,000 square feet of buildings are surveyed. You've got nearly 3,000 students and $84 million budget. On the right side, I think it's really important to understand your building vintages. You are in the oldest building in the district. You occupy 1/3 of this Main Street Board of Ed building at 227 Main Street. CJ Hooker School, being built in 1929, is your second oldest building in the district. And as you look at the additions and the ages of the additions, you start to see around 2000, somewhere around 1999, 2000, there was a bond referendum passed. And they took the approach of spreading the wealth, doing work at each one of the buildings. So you had an addition at Scotchtown, an addition at GIS, an addition at CJ Hooker, an addition at the high school. They really hit every building at that time period. Land was hired by the school district around 2013, I believe. And then in 2014, we passed a $4.6 million referendum. That was really a district-wide, a lot of HVAC improvements throughout the district, $2.5 million, I think. Another $2 million of improvements throughout the district. It was very sporadic. There were just projects that were cherry-picked from each building. And it was a spread the wealth type of approach. What I would say that is in 2019, 2018, when we passed the last referendum, there was a district-wide IT improvement project, which again is sort of like spreading the money around. But most of the work was focused on the high school. And if you look at these ages, you start to say GIS had an addition in 2001. CJ Hooker had an addition in 2001. SAS, we just passed the referendum or transferred capital, sorry, and we're going to do nearly $10 million of work there. So if you're looking at prioritizing, I'm not going to lead you there, but GIS and CJ Hooker were really the last touched buildings that had a priority level treatment. And I would just say as an architect, I would consider looking at those buildings a little bit more closely. But this is just an overview of your district. We have to walk this delicate balance of not saying the sky is falling when you have a lot of problems and a lot less money to deal with them. But really, we're going to draw your attention to some of the issues, walk you through some slides, giving you examples of what's in the BCS, what would go into the 5-year plan. But we're not going to spend a lot of time digging through why that photo is shown. They're really just supposed to give you kind of examples of everything.
What did we find? So starting with Scotchtown Avenue School, you have a good amount of sidewalk replacements that need to be taken care of, including the fire lane that goes around the entire building. We also need to install a retaining wall at the back of the gymnasium. And if I go too fast, just let me know and stop me. I'm just gonna try to make it through here. So we have masonry pointing that needs to be done. There's a good amount of open mortar joints. Water gets in, then we have issues within the wall, and then we have issues with water entering the building. So hopefully some of these photos you can see that there's missing mortar joints. And then there's also some cast stone in the courtyard that the detailing is a little off, that needs to be looked at. And is also letting water in, and none of them are things that are huge concerns in terms of safety, but it does look in this one photo that the corner piece had at one point been either removed or came out. Then we have in the interior of the building, we have been talking about all of the HVAC upgrades that are going to be done. In the future, if air conditioning is added to the cafeteria, we would need to replace the ceiling. So that would be a good opportunity to replace the ceiling and the flooring and do that entire project holistically. And then also there's the 2 bathrooms that are next to the main office. They're very small, they're not ADA accessible, and they are the main bathrooms that are used when people come in and use the cafeteria or the cafetorium. So we would recommend that they are updated. Then we have a good amount of floor abatement. There is asbestos tile flooring in the building. It is in sound condition. It's not a safety concern at this point. It's just a matter of, we do usually try to get those out of the schools. Then there's ceiling replacements, door replacements in the 1962 building, and also bathroom renovations in the kindergarten classrooms.
All right, so mechanical and electrical improvements, as Matt mentioned, we are doing a project this summer for replacement of all the unit ventilators that are in the building and adding air conditioning to the classrooms. So you won't see that on here. So next steps that I identified on here was adding a gas-fired rooftop unit for the cafetorium, which is a largely used space in the building that currently really doesn't have much of anything in terms of mechanical systems, aside from some general supply fans and exhaust. And replacement of the main office rooftop unit that's currently up there. As you can see in the picture there, that unit has surpassed its useful service life. Electrically, what we have there are mostly life safety related topics to bring the building up to what we would consider current code, right? Not that the building is incorrect, there's just fire alarm systems and life safety systems have advanced quite a bit in the time period since the old stuff was put in. So it's adding more coverage to your fire alarm system, adding emergency lights, and installing a carbon monoxide system for gas detection.
Yeah, and every year the school district has a fire inspection, and every year they pass their fire inspection. The code gets continually modernized and becomes more stringent. At the time of installation, these systems met code. As the code has evolved and become more stringent, there are new requirements. That's the provisions that you're seeing up here.
At Goshen Intermediate School, we have the ADA ramps at both the front and the cafeteria entrance. They have some tripping hazards. The railings don't meet ADA code, and there has been some repairs to the stairs by the cafeteria, but they still have some tripping hazards there, and also the doors get stuck at that location. We did recommend dumpster enclosures at all of the schools. Right now the dumpsters are just out in the parking lots, so that's just a way to contain them. And then we have a good amount of sidewalk replacement that is required on the one side of the building, the fire lane also that goes around. These are all end up being tripping hazards. And we think that this will be used more by the district and the school if the area is in better condition. GIS roofs need some attention. We did replace one section of the roof, but currently the roof to the gymnasium is actively leaking, and the entire building, short of the area that was replaced in 2016, needs to be either replaced or recoated.
Yeah, when we looked at this job in 2014, we did an infrared scan, and what we thought we were going to find over at Scotchtown Ave School in terms of moisture infiltration was a lot less significant. So we narrowed down the focus of the scope of work at GIS, and those light gray roofs were really the only areas that we touched. There were some other pieces that were flashed in and weather tided and improved, but that building section with the square on the top of the page or the top of the image, that's your penthouse rectangle in the middle, which is your air equipment, your HVAC equipment for the gymnasium. Just beyond that shadow line where it looks a little darker on the gravel, you actually have an active roof leak, and you can kind of see the water ponding on that top right photo where it's darker. Right now you have a tarp, I believe, in GIS, and it's funneling water down into a garbage pail. It's certainly something we would like to address. Most of our recommendations are related to envelope improvements, life safety improvements, keeping your occupants safe, warm, dry. That's sort of where we come from as architects and engineers, and how we make our recommendations. So you'll see a lot of our slides focus on envelope improvements.
We don't like roofs to leak, but we especially don't like them to leak on gym floors because of the wood floors. It can be much more expensive. And we have also, again, envelope improvements. We have masonry repointing that's required here, a lot of open joints. We have the two doors at the backside of the gymnasium. The lintel is starting to bow in the center and it causes them to get stuck. So we would like to replace the lintel on that. Also your doors, the doors are at end of life for this building and need to be replaced. In the interior, you have a good amount of vinyl asbestos floor tile and also asbestos containing material ceilings. This, while it still is safe and usable, it makes it harder to do projects because every time a project is done, you have to have abatement as part of it. So it's something that we would like to replace, abate everything once and be done with it at the school. You do have two locker rooms that are underutilized, being used kind of as storage, and that's one thing we always look at is schools always need more space, so we're always looking for underutilized spaces that we can repurpose into other uses. You have locker replacement that's required, the library carpet, and renovations to the cafetorium. That's your main used space in that building, and it has flooring and ceilings that need to be replaced.
Usually a dead, if you go back, a dead giveaway for vinyl asbestos tile or VAT tile is that avocado green on the bottom left corner. It's usually about 9 inches by 9 inches. And Tom, I know he's smiling because he sees it all the time. We see it all the time. It's sort of one of those things when you walk into a building as an architect. Now you as a layperson know, hey, that's where we have some asbestos. There are certain ceiling tiles, the 12 by 12 spline ceiling tiles, which are also often a dead giveaway. What's a little misleading in GIS is that is looking like a standard 2x4 ceiling, and it actually has an asbestos content, which throws off my teachings in architecture and studying buildings. You wouldn't know it, but it's there. So GIS has a lot of asbestos containing material throughout the school district, both in the floors and ceilings. Makes it really difficult to do a more direct capital project because you're indirectly touching these materials, which means you got to deal with the indirect costs of the abatement of those materials as well.
Excuse me. So mechanically here, we identified a classroom unit ventilator replacement. That's primarily to increase occupant comfort. We do that by increasing ventilation or bringing it up to current code and adding air conditioning so that we can control temperature and humidity levels. So the first item there is a full replacement of the unit ventilators and adding air conditioning to those classroom unit ventilators. The second piece of that is to support the increased ventilation that you get with the unit ventilator replacement will require a boiler replacement there as well. Electrically, a lot of the bullet items here are now being recommended to support adding air conditioning. So the existing electrical service isn't large enough for air conditioning. So we'd have to increase the service to the building, which gets you a switchgear replacement because the gear that's there is old and past its useful service life anyway. Same thing goes for the circuit breakers. They're old, but to add air conditioning, we're going to have to change those, swap them out anyway. And then we fall back into those life safety items, installing a carbon monoxide detection system and continue to upgrade the fire alarm devices throughout the buildings.
At CJ Hooker Middle School, there's a good amount of work that needs to be done to the tennis courts. There's a lot of cracking. The net poles need to be reset. You can see in that photo there. And then also the parking lot next to it. The district did undergo parking lot repairs at this building last summer. So that is all in good condition. There's minor sidewalk work that needs to be done here. So these are the main items. And also the field house improvements. I don't know when the last time the field house was upgraded. So there's a good amount of work there. Not anything that totals a lot monetarily, but there is items there. The stairs at the exterior, the two main monumental set of stairs, and then the one also in the center. There's a lot of mortar joints that are open here, and also the railings, and you can see the bottom of the columns and the two knee walls to the side. They all need some work here. Also, the exterior doors need to be replaced. Roofing replacement is limited to the 1962 edition, which is what was being depicted there. There's, again, masonry, repointing and repair that needs to be done. And some of these photos, if you've never been on the roof, you can not necessarily see, but there's a lot of open joints, in the upper level that you only see when you're on the roof. You don't see that when you're down, on the ground looking up. So we are recommending repointing and then also cleaning. You see all of the white below all of the sills, and that needs to be cleaned. Inside the building, you do have some vinyl asbestos tile in this building as well. You even have it on the walls that we would like to remove. At some point, they must have put it on there. I don't know if it was for sound purposes or to cover plaster repairs, but we would want to remove that. And up in the upper right-hand corner, I tried to show that there's open joints at a window and step cracking, and see how that correlates to the inside to the plaster damage in that particular classroom.
I would note, having done a major HVAC project at CJ Hooker School, the original building has asbestos in the walls, in the floor, and pretty much everywhere. So anytime you do anything in there, it's an abatement project. I hate to say it, it's not just finishes, it's in the mastic. It's actually used as a vapor barrier in the walls, a barrier, fire barrier in the floors. And so anytime you penetrate anything, it's an abatement project. And it becomes one of the major escalators of cost at CJ Hooker School to undertake any work.
Well, if I could just add one more thing in CJ Hooker is some of the asbestos flooring has been encapsulated with carpeting 20 years ago. Carpet's now torn and taped. So we're almost at a point of critical failure, if you will, because it's unsafe to be in the room and I can't remove the carpet or do anything with it. So they're starting to relocate the classrooms, but they can only relocate one. That's just the tip of the iceberg, and that is something that I think that, at least when I was working with the group here, is to say a material deficiency is the interiors in CJ Hooker, as opposed to GIS where things were in fairly good condition. That was something that I thought was obsolescence and perhaps something that we would like to plan for programming going forward. But there is a difference in some of the interior finishes and where we're at. CJ Hooker is something we really have to look at.
This is just the 1962 edition. Again, the cafeteria needs upgrades, ceiling replacement. Actually, what Jim was referring to is the upper right, but in one, that's the French room. There is tape on the floor, tripping hazard, but there's asbestos underneath there. So you're really limited as to what you can do with that right now.
So CJ Hooker looks almost just like Goshen Intermediate School. Here we're recommending the classroom unit ventilators be replaced and air conditioning be added to those classrooms. We did identify 6 or 7 instructional spaces, mostly small group instruction rooms that don't currently have a unit ventilator. They just have some traditional fin tube radiation for heat and air and an operable window. So we would add unit ventilators to there with air conditioning as well. The boilers were replaced as part of that 2000 project Matt had referenced, and it seems like they have enough heating capacity to accommodate any additional ventilation we may need to add for that building. Electrically, same scope as GIS, right? So we had air conditioning, we got to upgrade the electric service to accommodate that. The old electrical switchgear that needs to be replaced, circuit breaker panels, same thing. And then again, continuing that life safety aspect by adding fire alarm notification devices and installing a carbon monoxide system.
So before you go, Scott, for the layperson, unit ventilator in the top picture in the middle?
Correct,
On the left side?
on the left-hand side,
Okay.
and on the right-hand side is just a convector cabinet, so
And
heat.
the bottom left is the switch here?
That's the
I
switchgear.
want to make sure we all know.
Yeah.
I'm asking.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I'm learning too.
CJ Hooker Annex. So this building is kind of unique in that it has a shop in the middle and it's sandwiched between the district's IT and the PPS offices. So you have a dirty, noisy space in the center and 2 offices on both sides. And you have a roof that leaks, and you definitely don't want that over your IT. So we've identified roof replacements and repairs that are needed here, as well as window replacement. There's a good amount of exterior and interior work that needs to be done at this building, including the ceilings. And actually, in the PBS offices, right now the walls don't go all the way up to the ceilings, and so that kind of makes it so that there's not the required privacy for the type of meetings that are happening in those offices. So we're recommending for that to be taken up to the ceiling to have some more privacy for those offices.
It is one of the strangest assortment or combination of spaces that you could figure to put under one building, where you have a dust, noise producing center separating a quiet office space from an technology laden, moisture, dust sensitive space on one side. That should paint the picture fully.
Mechanically and electrically here, it's replacing the main air conditioning system for the IT server room. While we were in there, those units were running nonstop, and it seems like they're undersized based on the capacity of the IT equipment in there. Second item there is replacing the air conditioning systems that serve the office area and adding mechanical ventilation to them. Those systems have reached or have exceeded their useful service life. Electrically here, we just continue with the life safety, adding fire alarm notification devices and installing the carbon monoxide system.
The high school, we've just done a lot of work at the high school, a lot of work at the site of the high school. So really what's left is tennis court upgrades. There's some sidewalk replacements, but then there's also some parking lot replacements at the northwest side of the building. The retaining wall that's shown here is just to show that it's a small item in the whole grand scheme of things, but you have it sectioned off so that there's nobody gets hurt with it. So it's something that could be replaced and actually falls under the maintenance category. For exterior improvements, you have again masonry repair, and then you also have roof replacement. The roof on the new addition is obviously new, but then we need some roof replacement and recoating for the rest of the building. In the interior, the A-wing ceilings need to be replaced. You're seeing a lot of ceilings. These aren't always necessarily on the third floor, which would mean that it was from a roof leak. Some of them are plumbing leaks from the bathrooms above, because the bathrooms are all stacked. Then you have floor replacement that's required. The photo on the top is in the art room. And then bathrooms. So while the bathrooms still function, they're starting to show their date and their age.
Which is the age of the original construction of the building, which is
76.
it's just about my age.
So
So
So mechanically, again, we're kind of repeating the scope of work, replacing the classroom unit ventilators. This is in the A-wing primarily, and adding air conditioning to those classroom spaces. When we did the handful of unit vents under the 2019 project, we gave those unit ventilators air conditioning. And then kind of slowly picking off, providing air conditioning to spaces that don't have it. Larger spaces like the library and the gymnasium and the wood shop also have an air handler. Again, to support adding air conditioning though, it requires a service upgrade, replacing the old switchgear, updating old circuit breaker panels. There seems to be a nuisance ongoing circuitry issue associated with the fire alarm system. So we think there's some circuit breakers that need to be fixed over there and possible examination of the way that system is wired. And then again, it's just modifying the electrical distribution system to accommodate any air conditioning that we add.
okay, so it's quick. It's a new building. There's a few maintenance items. That's it. Then we have the Main Street building. So your oldest building, 1912. A lot of masonry work that needs to be done. The parking lots need to be repaved. The windows need to be replaced. The windows in this room, actually the room above us right now have a spandrel glass in the top. It'd be really nice if that could be, when those are replaced, if that could be, go back to the historical arch top window. In the interior, you have some ceiling replacements that's required on the second and third floors. There's carpet replacement required. The bottom left-hand corner is actually the room behind us, or behind the screen here. There's been probably a sprinkler pipe that has leaked in the past. What's a little bit concerning about that is that there's storage in there, paper storage. Then there's the bathrooms on the second and third floor that need to be replaced, as well as the bathrooms here that when it rains too much don't work properly in floor room. Also in the business office, there's some settling of the floor. The flooring has been replaced multiple times, but really it needs to be re-leveled.
So mechanically here, we're recommending replacing the hot water boilers. The ones that are here now are approximately 50 years old. So we would do gas-fired boilers. Right now, it's a combination of gas and oil, and we would replace the hot water circulating pumps. The next thing that we have here is the air handler that serves this space. It's comprised, it's really two systems, that rooftop unit that's right out there, that's on the parking lot, and an air handler in the back. I'm recommending replacing the air handler in the back and adding air conditioning to that and getting rid of that piece of equipment out there. Electrically, the service here is actually pretty good. We don't need to increase that, but there are some old panel boards on the second and third floor that we'd like to replace. And again, continuing with adding new fire alarm notification devices throughout the building.
Our last building is the bus garage. There is parking lot asphalt replacement that needs to take place. This building also has a good amount of masonry work that needs to be redone. The roof needs to be recoated and the windows need to be replaced. In the interior, the bathrooms are in need of upgrades in the both sides, both for the bus drivers and in the main office area. There's some spalling of the CMU in the interior of the building, and then there's also doors that need to be replaced.
Mechanically, there's one air conditioning, I'll call it an air handler system that serves the bus garage office area that's reached or surpassed its useful service life, and we're recommending that it be replaced. And when we do that, we also tie in the bus driver's room into that same system. There's a single bay service area in the back of the building that doesn't have an exhaust fan. We'd like to add one there and put a gas detection system in with that. And in the large service area, the exhaust fan, the general exhaust fan that serves that space, and also the vehicle source capture exhaust fan, it's time for those to be replaced as well. And when we did that, we would add a gas detection system there as well. Electrically, we got a bunch of old circuit breaker panels that need to be replaced. And again, we're continuing with the life safety, adding carbon monoxide detection and fire alarm notification devices. Electrical buses, I think Danielle snuck that in there.
No, we could put that.
No, it's all right.
We did, we snuck it.
We did, we snuck it right in there on you. I thought if I put it on your slide that you'd have to talk about
I
it.
can definitely talk about it. After you do your thing, I'll tell you the other side of the story.
Okay. This is just put on there just so that it's on your radar that every school bus purchased after 2027 needs to be electric. And then by 2035, the entire fleet needs to be changed over. And so that will mean that there's some changes that need to be done to the infrastructure of the building, or the building just might not be able to accommodate it. We need to think about a new building for the bus garage.
And one step further back from that is really the grid also needs to be changed to accommodate that. There are some school districts, one in particular up in Rochester, that did all this, they did the design, and when they went to do the project, their utility company said, we don't have the power to support that. And that was it. So they have everything designed and in the can, but they can't do the project because the power company can't support them. So it's just it's another wrinkle in the conversion to electricity.
So our job is to deliver the news, the information, and some of it, we're gonna lead you to some things or steer you, because it's the responsible thing to do. But you're gonna need to pick up the baton, and we're gonna pass it over to you a little bit and ask you to drive and say, you know, the 5-year plan is really your baby. It's your fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers, to the public that you represent. And it's how you think you would best allocate that money and that resource to take care of the assets. So while we can prepare a really nice 5-year plan allocated with escalation per year, and other districts ask us to do that on their behalf and they give us feedback, we're gonna bring you the BCS here, and the process will be, here are the projects. Here is what we think is important. How do you wanna handle this? Because this should be interactive and you should be engaged in this process. And there's a lot to be learned from the information, the observations we made through undertaking this process. And we're really here to deliver the news to you and to ask you, to ask to meet with you and collaborate with you in the future to develop your 5-year plan. This is not us putting it down. The 5-year plan is a live document. Every year, I think every year, SCP has you have a requirement where you're supposed to update it annually. Most school districts don't do that, quite honestly. They just don't make that change annually. And you should put it on your radar. We deliver the 5-year plan, and at the end of the year, 1 year later, let's look back on that and say, Jim got all of these projects done through his maintenance budget. We allocated this much money in our capital reserve. We have a project on the horizon that we plan to take, and start to chip away at whatever you think you can get done.
Furthermore, every time we submit something to the state, any project that goes to the state, we have to include that updated 5-year plan. So if you're not updating it, they become much more stringent about making sure that it's updated in there. And it doesn't have to be a big process. It could be as easy as us marking off the projects that have been done.
So, I mean, what does this all mean? You've identified a ton of projects. There's a lot of money that's at stake. We did $25 million worth of work in 2019. I actually think it was more like $35 total million invested. $10 million in HVAC and roof upgrades. Roof projects about to start. HVAC project is forthcoming. We've identified $90 million in capital projects. And really, where do we go from here? It's up to you to tell us how you want to fund those projects. What is important to your constituency or you specifically? And you need to give us feedback on how we want to allocate these projects and prioritize them so we can complete the 5-year planning process with you. That's essentially it. The BCS is a procedural compliance document. The 5-year plan is sort of the value added approach where we move past box checking and we move into like a real constructive conversation about how to take care of your facilities. So that's basically where we've gotten to today. We have met the procedural requirements of filing the BCS. That is up and through the business portal on time. There's no set schedule for the 5-year plan, although we'd like to, work through it with you at a quick pace. There's a lot of information here and it takes a lot of time to digest it. So we'd encourage you to give us any questions you have, whether it's on the fly now or in writing later, preferably.
Yeah, so if I can jump in just for a second before the board fields any questions. As you're aware, one of the things that we did to give you just yet additional feedback and what we will pass along now is the new and updated version of the BCS, establish a community facilities committee. And led by Mr. Freeze, Ms. Lamourant, they have had an opportunity to do exactly what your district architects and engineers have done. They've been on roofs, they've been in basements, they've been in classrooms, they've seen it all. And then we'll additionally see this and we'll come to report to you before the budget is adopted so that when you have an opportunity to look back at what Ms. Lamourant and I have proposed in terms of maintenance and projects for facilities, if there is anything that you want us to look at differently, be it this year or a year after, in terms of what we might include in the budget to address some of these issues, it's just another voice then for the facilities committee of the board to get together, really contemplate all of this and work together with your architects and engineers to craft that 5-year plan. As Matt said, it's something you want to revisit on an ongoing basis because that one thing that was not a critical measure this year might be next year. So while you had pushed it out to year 3, year 4, year 5, all of a sudden maybe a year 2 issue.
Escalation rates may influence your decision to push work down the road. So we've seen unprecedented escalation, inflation in the construction market to the tune of 11.3%, I think, last year, which is roughly 1% per month, 3% per quarter. So we're going to use and carry those escalation rates planning moving forward, more so that you're conservative in your approach and understanding that the market conditions, we hope we'll see some relief. Inflation may die down. You hear people talking about recessions and that could potentially influence inflation. But our planning practices, I think we're in the 8 to 10% range on escalation. We know that 12.66. We're going to go 12% for the first year, seeing an ease up over the next several years. That's what our market publications are telling us is a responsible planning practice. I only tell you that because as we lay this out, you may say, hey, we want to push something to year 5 because it's a lot of money and we gotta build up a capital reserve. What happens in year 5 is you've increased the cost of the project by 30-something% and it gets a little out of control and a little out of hand. So just keep that into consideration when you're starting to prioritize work.
Any questions?
Did you know I was gonna have a question?
I didn't
No, I just-
specifically do.
First of all, thank you very much the way you guys presented. Really well laid out, fantastic presentation. And I just think you did a really great job of conveying that stuff, you know. I was laughing about some of those points just to really make everyone get it. I really only have kind of one question, not to go too deep. Maybe you can't answer it now, that's okay. A few things jumped out at me. These were highlights, well put together highlights. There were a few items you pointed out about an active roof leak we had, possibly some fire alarm system, high school, I believe, maybe some circuitry. Out of the items that you found, maybe even a tripping hazard and an accessibility ramp. Out of those high level items, how many of those would you kind of see as like an immediate concern, whether that be for water or life safety? That's something that should be really looked at to get in the budget right away.
I mean, from one of 3 perspectives here, I'll say the roof leak. I know that Jim has done some things that he could, but because of the temperatures, there's not a lot you could do to take care of that during the winter for a more cohesive and extensive fix. But in my opinion, whenever you have an active roof leak and it's potentially causing you to not use a space or cause additional damage, that would be my highest priority. Of course, fire alarms throughout the district, being that they were code compliant at the date of installation. I have kids in the district and in these buildings, and I think about it all the time. I place a high priority on life safety. It's the most important thing that we do. And ethically, it would be irresponsible of me not to say, you have fire alarms throughout the district that need modernization. A circuit, needs to be troubleshot, and it's certainly something that would be alarming, no pun intended, but could be a problem. And those are the things that I think, Danielle, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, one thing that I didn't mention here is if we had anything when we did our walkthroughs that was life safety right then, we don't come to today and tell you about it today. We tell you about it immediately. Also anything on the BCS, anything that has an H or an S next to it is health and safety or structural. If any of those things are found to be unsatisfactory, we have to consider the entire building unsatisfactory. If it's critical failure, it's a critical failure of the building and it needs to be shut down. So those are things that if there was something that was so alarming, we would have told you right away. And believe me, there has been ones where we've gotten back to the office and called the district and said, you need to do this, this, or this. I've also seen ceilings that have started to fall down, bowing in the middle, and the ceilings were attached to the plaster above and they were bowing. And that's what you've heard about in other districts. And so witnessing that, right then shut down that room. So while we didn't find any of that here, we do want to make sure that none of that gets to that level. So when we talk about tripping hazard, you can trip, any location, but I don't think that any of them are so major. We do want to take care of the roof leaks, and then work with Jim on a couple of the minor things that can be taken care of.
Great, and I only had one other question, and it might be a district architect question. So you had pointed out, we have certain items that would be in non-compliance today, but were designed to those codes at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And you pointed out one of the accessible bathrooms. Do we have any student body within the building with mobility impairments that are not being serviced by the inaccessible spaces? Or are there all their accessible mobility impairment needs met currently?
So the issue is a matter of convenience. I will say that all of our buildings have compliant bathroom spaces. The problem is sometimes the travel that has to happen from one side of the building to the other.
Particularly CJ Hooker, where you could be at one end of the H and you need to get to the other corner where there's a boys' bathroom with the accessibility, for example.
That's also one of the things that we have to make sure that you have an accessible path, that you could reach all the regularly occupied spaces with it. You might not be able to in some schools that don't have elevators get to the 3rd floor in a classroom, but as long as there's classrooms on the other floors, you're all right. But if your auditorium was on the 2nd floor, you're on a floor and you didn't have a lift of some kind, then we need to accommodate for that. But yes, all of your buildings do have accessible bathrooms.
So just to conclude, to put a cap on this, and as the board has an opportunity to spend more time looking at the report and what has been shared with you. We had the luxury of doing quite a fine project in 2016 that really addressed the program. If you spend time dissecting this, I would challenge the board to really think about the next phase of work. Deferred maintenance on infrastructure can catch up with you very quickly. Typically don't like to insert my opinion, but I think that we need to really think about our roofs, our boilers, our temperature and comfort, our electrical service before we can really turn the page to dig into programs, not to ignore a program. But I think there's really some priority items as far as the health, safety, and comfort of our classrooms and our buildings that really we need to take a hard look at here before we go much further.
Thank you. I do want to say thank you. It was very thorough as usual. And I can speak for myself. I need more time to digest it. Mr. Freeze, I would respectfully ask if you could probably give us your critical areas. I don't think that if you have provided that, then I didn't get an opportunity to look at that. So if you could, that would probably be helpful to the board. You know, the areas that you see as like, I don't know if the board would think the top 5 areas, whatever they may be. And just quickly, this is going off on a tangent because I'm thinking about it as I'm talking. The doors, all the door replacements, is there a concern with fire, safety, anything with the doors that those need to be put up on the list?
Function, doors that bind, you
Just
can't
function.
leave freely. So, and by binding, sticking, or not being able to open easily, that could present a hazard egressing from the building.
Okay.
So if you have a young student, a small student who can't force the door open, that can be problematic.
And that's only a handful of the doors that we've identified. A lot of them are exterior doors that are just end of useful life, and could be more energy efficient.
And you could also possibly target them the areas that you feel that in-house you might be able to address as opposed to a capital project. Does that make sense?
Does.
Anything else? Great.
Great. Thank you
Did
very
you have,
much.
did you have another comment?
I just wanted to say two things. One is, as we talk about the projects, just wanted to remind the board that from the time we start talking about a capital project to the time it actually hits the pavement is 2 years. So that's, we have to just think longer term. And so anything that we can peel off and get done under maintenance, $1 in maintenance will cost you $5 down the road. And these are things, maintenance items really don't need to go to SED. I can replace sidewalks and fix things. I can do paving, which I have done in the last 2 years. We really don't need to go through a capital project for those things. And we can take a look at fire alarm systems linearly, where we just say we're going to replace the fire alarm system, or we can look at replacing a fire alarm system when we upgrade all the other interiors and remove some of the asbestos, along with that project. So if we renovate the space and it needs an upgrade in the fire alarm system, that's the time to raise the pull stations 2 inches, while we've got the whole place torn apart. That's one approach, or we just say we're going to do the fire alarm system and deal with all the ancillary things as we go. So those are, just, an approach to the projects and how we get them done and how we discuss them. And the rest is a little more detail that we can talk offline.
Jim brings a good point about alterations to the building. Sorry, I won't prolong it too long. An alteration to the building may trigger the need to replace or upgrade your fire alarm system by code. So if you undertake a certain square footage of building renovation in comparison to what the building code says, a fire alarm system upgrade may be required by code. So we'll constantly be trying to feed you the right advice of how to scale your project appropriately to either undertake extra work to make it eligible for building aid and to make it safer. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
So as Mr. Loftus alluded to, Senator Skoufis actually reached out to regional superintendents this past Friday. If you've been watching the news, one of his largest advocacy items has been for oversight, if you will, in particular the Orange County IDA. And earlier this year, the board had agreed to write a letter on behalf of even Senator Skoufis regarding some kind of oversight of our IDA. As you know, the IDA is responsible for granting pilots for new businesses in the region. Sometimes these pilots can take on multiple years. The Legoland pilot, I believe, is actually a 30-year pilot. Pilots have affected the district, in full transparency, both negatively and positively. The Galleria Mall came off about 7 years ago, and once the Galleria Mall pilot came off, it was a massive reassessment, cost the district millions and millions of dollars in terms of tax or share refunds. We're having an issue with the Glen Arden pilot right now that is costing us about $800,000. On the flip side, Legoland is now making its payments. It's making its payments in cash to the district, and it's helping us to move in a positive cash flow direction. But again, we could be subject at the end of that pilot to a massive reassessment on that land and any construction on that land. What Senator Skoufis is asking for is part of the budgetary process. He is asking that this letter be signed off on potentially by superintendent and Board of Education, basically advocating to the governor that 2 monitors, similar to we use the East Ramapo situation, be placed into the IDA as a component of the overall function of the IDA. What does that mean? Right now, when the IDA meets, none of the affected municipalities get any seat at the table. So that the pilot is solely decided on the function of the board of the IDA. What these 2 monitors would do would give us some kind of recourse, some kind of fallback, at least to have a conversation either before, or I use the example of the Glen Arden pilot, when something goes wrong, when an entity is not paying, for us to be able to approach the IDA to say, this needs to be revisited. We need to have some kind of resource, because while the pilot was great at its inception, now the taxpaying member is not paying. So essentially what he's asking for, he wants to submit this with the legislative budget proposal, particularly for Orange County, particularly for the Orange County IDA. And I just wanted to put it out there to the board that I don't think it's a bad idea for this to be supported, but I will take the direction from the board.
There were, Dr. Coates, just a couple of items that came up in email correspondence with Karen and some of the other delegates, and Allison was copied on a bunch of these emails as well. The proposal will also be that the monitors are paid for by the IDA, so there'll be no cost out of the districts. There was a lot of positive feedback coming from the different Orange County schools. The Orange County School Board Association has already, their members voted to support it. And over the course of the past few days, we've seen district after district responding with things like, at least this is something, at least it's a little bit more presence than we had before. It's a good foot in the right direction. I can't recall which 3 or 4 districts were kind of recently responding with that.
Menacing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they'll be, adding basically the signatures that, support of the superintendent and school board of town X to the letter. So just a little bit more.
And if you can correct me if I'm wrong, the deadline is March 31st, I believe. I thought that's what I saw. And BOCES is asking, they're gonna send the letter. They're just asking to confirm that we would support it, and then they'll send a letter on behalf of all the districts.
And just an email in the form of support, once it was discussed with the board, is adequate. They're not asking for a resolution exactly. Yep.
So, and just for clarity too, the goal here is not to inhibit growth. We realize that we need business, we need to diversify our tax base. It just can't go on checks. We have lost to the tune of almost $860,000 in revenue from the Glen Arden pilot alone. Minnesink, the power plant, lost, I can't tell you, several $1 million in revenue from unpaid pilot dues. You can go district by district and hear similar stories. It's just for accountability for these businesses to be able to pay what they contractually agreed to pay.
I mean, if we can make the decision now, I was gonna ask actually tonight, so I would support it.
Me too.
I agree. I'm in support.
I would support it.
Great, I will send Senator Skoufis an email.
Or I know Karen Meyer was also on. I can forward you the email
Okay.
from OC's.
Yeah,
Either way.
Yeah, he asked just to reach out because they have to get their budget bills in, he wants to know if he's gonna be able to submit this or not.
Allison, do you want to email Karen or do you want me to?
I'll let her know that we're setting. I'll let her-
Great, thanks.
Okay, and then I'm gonna ask our principals and directors to join us. We're up to the instructional budget presentation for tonight. Ms. Lambrand is going to take the lead, but any questions that come up, we'll as well, so if you all don't mind. John is the, Santos.
Oh, thank you. Bonus book. Just open it up, cheers.
Okay, so we are here tonight to present the instructional portion of the budget. Ms. Lambrand is going to guide through the financials. I will help to discuss some of what is being supported in this budget. If you have any questions for our principals and directors, again, this is the instructional portion of that. I want to make sure that you clearly understand what is addressed and what's not addressed in this budget. Then we'll talk politically where the budget process stands. And again, I can share some more information from our meeting from Senator Skoufis from Friday. But without further ado, turn it over to Ms. Lambrand to get us started.
Thank you, and good evening. So tonight is our second budget presentation, and it is the second part of the expenditure-driven part of the budget. This is our timeline. There is an update. This looks familiar from last week or last board meeting as well, but there is an update on April 11th. We are anticipating that the Facilities Advisory Committee will be here, or the group that we've been working with should have some report for the board as to what they've experienced walking through the buildings and what they've seen, looking at the conditions of the buildings. April 17th is when the adoption of the budget needs to occur in order for us to file the property tax report card on time. And that's also another agenda item that you'll have to approve. The submission of the report card has to be done by the 25th of April. May 2nd is when we have our public budget hearing, and May 16th is the annual budget vote. So our budget development goals, again, I won't go too far in depth because you saw these last week at the last board meeting, but we always align the budget goals with the board's goals, and we also align it with the district strategic plan. Some of our goals also include ensuring highest quality teaching and learning for all our students and providing a safe learning environment for them as well. We want to maintain our financial stability, and we also want to stay within the tax levy cap. Some of our considerations and challenges include state aid. This year, we've been fortunate enough to be fully funded with the remaining amount of the foundation aid. The following year could be more challenging because we are concerned with the 24-25 budget, but for this year, our state aid has been funded. We are still waiting, however, for the state to adopt the budget before we know for certain. Tax levy cap and rising CPI are also challenges that we must deal with, as well as enrollment, and that's enrollment in our district, as well as our special education students moving in or moving up into the buildings. Facilities and technology, we need to maintain these as well as improving them. And then there's our debt service, which is also related to facilities, so to speak, because if we were to do a large capital project, we would have to do it, and that would increase our debt service. So the instructional section of the budget has 5 sections, and they're listed up above, and I'm going to describe what's in these 5 sections at a high level, but if you have any questions, certainly ask me. Curriculum development and supervision. In here is where we have the assistant superintendent for curriculum, personnel, and technology. We also have our building principals, our director of athletics, our director and the assistant director of PPS. And we also have the clerical help, all of those salaries, all their supplies, their equipment, and their needs in the office, also their professional development. In addition to this, we also have professional development planning for the entire district, as well as curriculum writing and work that they do during the summer. Teaching regular schools. This is where all of the costs associated with direct instruction for student occurs. So you'll find your teachers and assistants and aide salaries, all of their supplies as well as student supplies, all the textbooks, and also professional development for teachers and BOCES services. This year, you may have seen in the board packets in the detail that I've changed our program codes to match throughout the buildings. Prior to that, they had program codes in each building. We couldn't run a report such as by the art department throughout the district. It would have to be run in 4 separate reports, which could be cumbersome if you want to look at something quickly. So that's why you'll see in that report that I've moved things. You'll see minuses and pluses in different areas. But this is for all of the art, music, foreign language, ELA, science, math, social studies, PE, and health programs. Then we have special apportionment. This is where our special education programs are, our summer, evening, our English language learners, and new this year is our occupational education teachers, the family and consumer science, the technology, and the business departments. I've taken them out of the teaching regular school and moved them down into special apportionment. So this includes all of the teachers again, and the assistants and aides, all of the supplies for them as well as students, any equipment as required for IEPs. We also have all of their office supplies as well, and any business courses. And what else? We have all of the FACS and technology supplies for students as well as equipment. And that's in both the CJ Hooker building and the high school where you will find those. Under instructional media is where you'll find the library expenditures. That's your librarians and the aides or assistants, as well as our technology department. That's the technology for the whole district, and that includes all of the library books for the librarians, all of their supplies and equipment, and instructional technology includes the director as well as the technicians. And this also includes all of the software for the district. So we have our technology equipment as well as software, any supplies such as printer, ink, any small supplies, the mice, things like that are considered supplies and not equipment. And last but not least, we have pupil personnel services. And this is all of the services for our students. You have your guidance department, your psychologists, your social workers, nursing services. And then we have what I call the fun things, the co-curricular, which is where your clubs are and your teacher advisors are, and also your athletics. So I've taken those 5 sections of the budget, just like I did with the non-instructional budget, and compared it with the 22-23 school year. And in here we have some changes, some increases and decreases, mostly increases in this section. And I want to go through the drivers for each of those. Curriculum development and supervision, we have a slight increase. It's actually under 1%, and that's being driven by some breakage due to retirement or changes in personnel and contract settlements. Teaching regular schools, typically you'll see an increase in this section of the budget of 2 to 3%. This year, it is less, it is under 1%, and that's due to the changes that I made, moving the occupational education portion of the budget down into special apportionment. So that's why it does look a lot smaller than it should be typically. Special apportionment, we have an increase here of 7.8%, and the driver here is due to the occupational education movement down into that section, but also we have 14 students coming up that are preschool age coming into the schools. So we have placements and we have budgeted for those placements at BOCES. We actually have 56 students at BOCES and 13 in out of district placements for both day and residential. Then we have our instructional media. This year, we've budgeted for an E-rate project, which an E-rate project is funded by the government up to 50%. So that 50% we will get back, and it'll show up on the revenue side, but not until I'm presenting the 24-25 budget. This is to upgrade our wireless connections and our Wi-Fi and the infrastructure behind there. And that again comes to $477,000. And that is a large driver in this section of the budget. Pupil personnel services, we have an increase of 7.7% projected. And this is largely being driven by accurately putting in the projections for staff. Over the years, there's been so many changes in the business office and HR. And this year I've tried to take a hard look at where everybody is in the buildings and try to right size them in the budget. So that's why you'll see also in the detail, there's a lot of movement in those different codes. So our total increase comes to $2.4 million or 5.3%. And I checked last year's increase was also about 5.8% or $2.5 million. So there's not a big difference between those 2 years. And I've created a pie chart to show where the bulk of our money is going in the instructional side of the budget. And as you can see, it's under teaching, which is where you want your money to go. Our second largest portion is the special apportionment. Again, there's no surprises there. This is where we typically see budgets being spent throughout New York State. Our smallest part, I'm sorry to say to Jim, is instructional media, but again, that's typical, so don't feel bad. So our specific codes used in the instructional budget, again, these are the instructional salaries, 0.15 codes, and non-instructional are 0.16. The instructional salary codes are members of the teacher's retirement system, and the non-instructional codes are members of the employee's retirement system. So you have your administrators, teachers, and teachers' assistants belong to the 0.15 codes in TRS, and teacher aides belong to the ERS part of this, and your clerical workers as well. Our equipment codes are the 0.200 codes, and in this, it includes our technology equipment, which we receive dollar for dollar aid under instructional materials aid. We receive $24.20 that we are reimbursed for. And then I'll talk about the other aids as we get further down. Contractual items, the 0.400 codes, these include items such as professional development and our rental of the stage or any chairs for graduation, those types of things. Supplies, this is where you'll find your teacher supplies, student supplies, and also office supplies. Software, this is another instructional materials aid item. We receive $14.98 per student for our software that we purchase. So you always want to make sure you maximize these things and purchase them because we do get dollar for dollar aid for that. Tuition is our 0.470 codes. This is where you'll see our BOCES tuition. BOCES is under BOCES. Our private placements, as well as if we have any students from our district that are placed in foster homes outside of the district, we are still responsible for their education. So we do have to budget for that as well as our special ed placements. Let's see. Textbooks, this is instructional materials, aid, and library as well. We get $58.25 for textbooks and $6.25 for library books. Now these reimbursement rates have been the same, I don't even know how far back, before 2000. I almost want to say 1994, because that's the year my daughter was born, and I remember looking this up. This is something that we've always advocated at my professional organization, New York State ASBO, to have increased, but as you can see, it hasn't changed much, but we keep trying. Then last but not least is the BOCES codes. This is where we pay for our C-Tech placements, our special ed placements. Some of our professional development is also done at BOCES, and our technology, including equipment and software. And I've broken these down as a comparison with 22-23 again. And we do have some changes. Here's where that negative was. But at any rate, our salaries, our increase here is 1.9%. Typically, that would be 2% or more, but we do have some breakage this year due to retirements, so that's why we are under that 2% increase. Our equipment is declining. It's not because we're purchasing less equipment, but it's because after we maximize our structural materials aid for technology, I booked the rest of the equipment needs down in the BOCES code so that we can increase our aid that way, so because that's aidable through BOCES. So that change you can see if you look at our BOCES code, we have an increase of 21.5%, and that is part of the reason for that. And also our E-rate project that we're doing is under BOCES as well, which is also good. So that 50% is also getting aid through BOCES. So we're maximizing it as best we can. Contractual services, the biggest driver here is for professional development, and that's a 7% increase. It also includes other items, but the bulk of it is for putting money into our professional development. Under supplies, as you know, the rising prices of everything, we've had to increase this line item and hope that we have enough due to inflation. BOCES services we covered already. Then we have other. This is where software, tuition, and textbooks are. And this is, the driver in here is our tuition for our placements coming up, the pre-K children entering the school that have special needs. And there you see our total, 5.3%. Again, $2.4 million. Okay, and there's the distribution of their codes. You may recall back in the non-instructional section of the budget, I talked about how salaries and benefits make up the bulk of any budget. Here you can see the salaries piece makes up 75%. The other presentation benefits made up the bulk of the non-instructional side of the budget. Then our second largest is BOCES. Again, that's typical. You will see that throughout budgets in New York State. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Coles.
Okay, so I just want to speak a little bit to how we determine what would be included in terms of program or not included for that matter. We're going to defer talking about any changes in staff until we do the final presentation on revenue. But I want to give accolades to all the principals and directors. Mrs. Lamourant and I have had an opportunity to meet with them twice already to discuss their budget proposals. Everyone had a lot of great foresight, but the reality is when we talk about declining revenues and we're looking at our tax cap, once you get all the non-negotiables into the budget, there's very little room left to talk about expansion of program. But nevertheless, there's some very good things included in this budget proposal. So I'm going to work from the bottom up, if you will. So I'm going to actually work from one side to the other on what you see on the screen, starting with our elementary schools. So as we emerge from COVID, a lot of our focus has gone back to the root of core instruction and looking specifically at our math and ELA instruction within our elementary buildings, and in fact, all the way up to the middle school in 6th grade. About 5 years ago, we adopted a new math program, Math and Focus. One of the shortcomings of the Math and Focus program was the technology component of Math and Focus, and that was a lot of what we had heard from our instructional staff. Well, COVID, if anything, made the publisher get caught up, and we saw some very positive. So we were able this year to purchase the new version of the Math and Focus program. It's actually en route. What we have to do next year is be able to support that. We need to make sure that the teachers understand and have the support that they need to be able to engage and use those new instructional materials to make sure that we're maximizing program in the classroom. We also need to look at the literacy and the reading side. Right now, Dr. Wentworth, Ms. Driscoll, Armin, and Mr. Carter have been previewing a variety of different materials that we're going to get ready to purchase next year. Again, talking about core instruction, we have found ourselves picking around with different resources. We need to get back to a cohesive approach to instruction, and looking at a new balanced literacy program will help us to get there at the same time. Similarly, several years ago, when the science standards changed, we looked for what the right update would be for classroom instruction. Project Lead the Way, as you all know, is a program that is housed out of Syracuse University and is heavily based in project-based learning. We are now taking it to the next step, making sure that we have alignment across all 4 buildings. And this budget will help us to continue not only to be able to send teachers out to professional learning for updates, but also we now have several turnkey trainers within the district that also will continue to allow more and more teachers to be trained. And then finally, as we know, as we continue to work against substance abuse, 2 board meetings ago, the board approved the adoption of the new ADAC curriculum at the elementary level. We will continue to support those programs throughout the district. Working up to the middle school, you'll see a lot of that same alignment. One of our strategic goals has really been that K-12 vision. Again, we're looking at STEAM alignment with Project Lead the Way, making sure that those resources are there for substance abuse through ADAC. Again, the literacy program, and in fact, 6th grade, the math and focus program works all the way up to 6th grade, because in fact, many people forget 6th grade is still technically an elementary grade housed specifically within our middle school. And finally, at the high school, we're looking now to be in step with what seems like is coming with changes in graduation outcomes. When we're talking about graduation outcomes, we're talking about the potential changes that are coming with Regents exams. We're talking about things that are what we refer to as commencement level. And 2 things that are in the pipeline for us that have been adopted at the state level are both the seal of civic readiness and the seal of biliteracy. And essentially what that encourages students to do is almost, if you will, adopt a quasi-major while they're in high school. It steers them in a humanities pathway. It steers them to take some extra language courses. And what that does, they get a certain amount of points for each course that they take. In doing so, that preps them to be eligible when they graduate to either have that seal of civic readiness, that seal of biliteracy. Mr. Pantaleone has been working with the staff on the application process. I believe seal of biliteracy is due in August, and civic readiness is shortly thereafter. Is it December?
December, yeah.
December. So the high school is working to move and push that forward as quickly as possible. Again, we see the allusion to 712 STEAM alignment, Project Lead the Way. That's our capstone building, and we get to see some great project-based learning that really happens in the new STEAM lab at the high school. The other thing, as we've been talking about, we are going to be able to add some more dual enrollment classes for this year. What's nice about some of the dual enrollment classes is it is at minimal cost to the building, because a student, as long as the curriculum aligns for whatever courses that we choose to offer, can sit in and take the regular business class, or if they so choose, can take the same course for credit through Ramapo College. Mr. Pantaleone has also been researching opportunities to expand this next year through Mount St. Mary College. The goal being we want to get as many cost-effective measures in as opportunities to the course catalog for our students, so that those who are college-bound students really can pursue and achieve as much as they possibly can before they graduate from high school. Because for those of us paying college tuition, we know the costs are not going down. Again, we're going to continue to work closely with ADAC, and Mr. Pantaleone has been working with Ms. Jajic, Mr. Fedor, Mr. Johnson about the opportunity to expand our internship program for vocational opportunities. So those students that aren't necessarily perhaps BOCES students could still have an opportunity to go out into the community, earn credit, and prepare for the workforce or a trade school past high school, depending on what their goals are. I want to rewind for a minute down in the bottom corner there on district-wide initiatives. So Mr. Sterrett, Mr. Redeker, Mr. Carter, and myself have been working over the last couple of years to redo our vision of one-to-one technology in the district. So as many of you know, years ago when Chromebooks started to become the in thing, if you will, the district's goal was to put a Chromebook cart literally in every classroom. And we achieved that. But as we know, the pandemic rocketed in a different direction, the use of technology. So now we've been steering towards how do we get a device in every student's hand. Right now, what we have begun the phase in for is in 6th grade and in 9th grade, students get an individual device that is assigned to them essentially for the next 3 years. That becomes their personal device. At the elementary buildings, there's still Chromebooks, there's still devices there for the students to use in the classroom setting, but at the middle and the high school level, we will start to phase in and continue to phase in that one-to-one device that becomes theirs, that's their responsibility. If there's breakage, they have to take care of it. If there is any issue, they have to work with Mr. Stera and the technology staff either to repair or replace it. We moved, as Ms. Amaran said, some of that money out of a specific equipment line down into BOCES so that when we make those purchases, again, it comes to the subsequent year, that we can continue to draw aid on that. The one thing that we are watching very closely is simply the cost of the device. Probably about a year or two, Jim, we were paying about 200 a Chromebook. That's up closer to what, 280?
Yeah, I mean, it fluctuates, it certainly fluctuates, but yeah, right now we're around 250, but they have gotten more expensive.
So we are watching that closely because we want to make sure that A, we can continue to support the plan that we have drafted, but B, that we also still have funding available that if there is a new smart board that needs to go in, if there is a new technology piece for a 3D printer that we want to put in our elementary schools or a smart board that needs to be replaced, that we are still adequately funded to make sure that the technology that we want to make our classrooms 21st century truly exists and it's there. So in addition to the regular operational budget, I think it's important that we also talk about some of the grant money that is available to us for next year. And as we know, the federal grant money is going to allow for us to be able to use towards staff, towards program. And one of the things that we've been working together with the building administrators on is watching very closely the data that we see in terms of student performance. In doing that, we've decided that we're going to move forward going into next year to be able to hire an interventionist both in ELA and mathematics for each building in the district. In doing that, it will allow us to support the MTSS program. I'll give all the credit to Ms. Driscoll and Dr. Wentworth. They've been working very hard to prep for this, to make sure that we are supporting our students the best that we can. That will allow for our high school to start to engage with the middle school in terms of looking at gaps and looking at student performance at the same time. You will not see a revenue and expenditure in the operational budget because what essentially happens is once we encumber those positions, we then apply and we're able to use that grant money essentially to cover the gaps there. One of the other things that we are allowed to do with this money is to look at additional social emotional support. And we were talking about the possibility and would like to move forward with hiring an additional social worker. What that social worker position would be is a district-wide position. We would look specifically for CASEC certification. CASEC certification focuses on substance abuse, but they could travel to all 4 buildings working on programming, but they also could fill in with any mandated counseling as well when they weren't working on substance abuse work with each of the buildings. Separate pool of money that we will continue to support in the district this year is in relation to UPK. As we know, the state actually increased the number or the amount of dollars that is given to districts for, I'll say, expansion of universal pre-K. The one thing that they have not done is increase the per pupil allocation yet, but they are putting more money. Just to give you a benchmark of where our need is, and there is a need. We had 94 families this year apply for seats. We were able to seat 36 and we waitlisted 12. So there is definitely a need there. We will continue our relationship with On My Way for next year, but again, we'll have that bucket of money as well. And as Ms. Lamoran talked about also, one of the items that's in the budget, but will be funded 50% on the following year is our E-rate project. Mr. Stera has worked with our main provider, for BPS, our whole network, the wireless access points will get a full upgrade and a refresh around the district, or most of it at least, Mr. Stera? Entire district, so we'll get 50% reimbursement on that in the previous year. So I'm just gonna pause for a minute. The one thing I just want to be transparent about, the principals did make additional recommendations beyond this for us to consider. Again, with revenue caps, if you will, where we get stopped. There were certain things that could not go into there that they asked for. I didn't know if you wanted to ask the principals or directors any questions about what had been presented, anything further before Ms. Lamoran concluded.
I just have one question. So you would be looking to use the cursor and ESSER grants to fund the new positions?
Correct.
So would those be term positions, or is that something that you would then have to build into the budget once those grants run out?
So we talked to legal about that. It's a great question. You cannot adopt a temporary position. You have to adopt them as tenure track. So when we make the postings, we will put on the posting that these are being hired using CRISA and ESSER funds. So essentially, when the funds dry up, we would have to make one of two decisions. We'd either have to have layoffs at the time and create preferred eligibility lists, or look at our retirements at the time and see if they just simply slide in and fill those positions. Yeah. Anything else for the principals and directors before we can go? Okay, go to the next slide. So I'll let you jump in from there again.
Okay, so this is a summary of our major changes, both increases and decreases. We have increased costs in our salary section due to contractual settlements, but then on the flip side, we also have some decreased costs in salaries, and you see it again in the detail of the budget that you've received, and that's due to breakage. Breakage is what happens when somebody retires, say on step 20, and we hire somebody to replace that person, and they come in step 5, and they don't have perhaps as many credits, they don't have longevity yet, so that's what we call breakage. Contractual items, again, the increased costs here, we are trying to do more professional development next year. Big piece of that is in here. And I forgot to mention, we are also contracting with CORE for the AMP service, but I'm not versed enough in that, so I'm turning to Jim.
Advanced malware protection umbrella, it's just more security for our system. So, yeah, we have,
Which we need, everybody needs more security.
yeah, we keep enhancing our security.
So we also have BOSI services. Again, I've moved a lot of the software and the technology equipment up there after we maximize our aid. Supplies, this is based on our expense-driven costs of everything, inflation. Tuition increases are based on our new preschool students moving up into the district, into kindergarten from special ed, and the E-rate project. And the decreased cost is equipment, again, based on the shift over to BOCES. So our total proposed budget, you saw the non-instructional presentation that came to $2.7 million increase. And our instructional presentation tonight is an increase of a little over 2.4 million. And our grand total proposed budget for 23-24 is $88,928,747. This is an increase of 6.2% over the 22-23 budget, or $5.2 million. Looking at last year's increase for 22-23 over the prior year, we also had a 6.2 increase, or $4.8 million, close to $4.9 million. And as you can see, the percentage spent on non-instructional is 45% and instructional is 55%, which is where you want your funds to typically go.
So we did a 10-year look back on enrollment, and where this enrollment comes from, our district registrar every month is required to submit to you an enrollment report based on what she is seeing in the student management system. This report is actually as of June 30th of each respective school year. So if you do some real basic math on what you're seeing there, plus or minus 5%, our district enrollment has been fairly stable. Good enrollment is a good problem to have. We are watching very closely our lower grades right now. We are, like I said, no further off than where we have been in many years now from that plus or minus 5% range. I'll talk a little bit about what we were seeing in kindergarten registration. We'll go back to universal pre-K, but we are seeing fairly steady enrollment, especially compared to some of our neighbors that in some cases have seen 15, in some cases even 20% enrollment decreases in their districts. So let's talk about where we stand in terms of the fiscal picture in the state just for a minute. Again, I shared with you earlier, I had an opportunity to speak with Senator Skoufis as of Friday afternoon, actually, and Ms. Lerner was able to sit on that meeting with us. So Senator Skoufis was somewhat transparent that while the legislature and the executive branch would like to reconcile the budget, He said, don't be surprised if it is late this year. So the one thing I will remind the board that this is still somewhat of a fluid process, and let's talk about a couple of the variable factors. So while the executive branch put out its proposal, meaning the governor, this past week, the legislature also put out what they called its one house proposal, which actually took out some of the things that the governor proposed. I'll just run down them very quickly. One of them is up there. There's about a $550,000 carve out, if you will, for high impact tutoring that was supposed to be in the budget. The legislature said no. I was able to ask Senator Skoufis what that means. So that would have come specifically out of foundation aid. He was very clear that the legislature's stance on that is that that would simply just be restored to full foundation aid, that the district wouldn't lose that because then essentially districts would not be fully funded on their foundation aid. Doesn't affect us that much, but it rejects charter school expansion. There's additional building aid eligibility for UPK expansion. It rejects the legislative proposal rejects the zero emission bus reporting requirement. It rejects the extension of the school level financing reporting. It gives a 1-year extension on earnings limits for those in retirement. Big proposal that many districts have talked about also is it does have an allocation in there for universal free meals. We know that when COVID ended and the federal dollars ended, we went back to paying again. There's something called increase in capital outlay. So every year districts are allowed to do very small capital projects. In doing that, you can draw direct aid regardless really of any work that you've done. That capital outlay has been at about, well, it's been at $100,000, almost as long as the aid has been for textbooks and everything else. You can't put new garage doors on right now, unfortunately, for $100,000. So the proposal is to raise that capital outlay to $250,000. It has some accommodations for BOCES in there. And then the last piece that I think is very important for the board to know, there is a $1 million earmark for a foundation aid study. And the one thing I just encourage everyone to stay very mindful of, we've just fully funded the foundation aid formula. We just want to make sure that now moving forward that any new proposals doesn't reallocate or rebalance the money because again, it could be a situation where we give and have it taken away at the same time. We're watching very closely. We need to know where all of these proposals are going to land. There has been no comments from the legislature or the executive branch. I know that they are in negotiations right now. Again, our local senator said, be prepared for it. You know, there's a good possibility that it might be late.
Okay, I just wanted to run through, I know we had this also on the non-instructional section of the budget, but given all this new information regarding potential change in foundation aid funding after this next year, and also the presentation of the building condition survey, I want to point out that there are different things we need to consider if we stick with a zero tax levy increase. This was actually presented back in January, but I've made a few adjustments to this slide. And the first column is the year, but the second column is the cap percent increase. That's a change in the percentage of the cap only, not between the cap and the levy, just to be clear. Our final number for the tax levy cap calculation for 23-24 shows a 2.8% increase. That's a dollar increase of a little over $1.4 million between our current levy and if we were to go to 2.8%. So I took it a step further and tried to determine what the cost on a $300,000 home would be. And of course, this is based on current assessment values and our equalization rates. We don't have updated information yet, so I can only use those numbers. And that would come to a $320 increase. And then I took it to the 1% increase. If we were to go up to a 1% increase in the levy, we'd still be under the cap. The cap's 2.8%. And the dollar increase for a homeowner of a $300,000 assessed home would be $121. And with a 2% increase, again, you're still under the cap by almost 1%, because 2.8 is almost 3. $242 would be the amount that the average homeowner would pay. And also, I just want to explain also that our taxes make up 66% of our revenue. That's more than half of our revenue. So that there is a big impact on the amount of taxes that we have to levy and what that can do for us moving forward. Anybody have questions on this slide? And I know this probably looks familiar again, but this is what the projected tax levy cap at a zero increase would do over time. I know CPI is still high in comparison to prior years, and inflation keeps driving costs up. We don't know if costs will come down in the following year. We're preparing for them as if they won't. So that's also something to consider. But moving forward, I projected out to 26-27 school year. And if we were to stay at a zero tax levy increase, we actually see a decline in the tax levy cap in 25-26, and that's for 1.1%. And then it also declines the following year at 0.5%. And the driver here, again, I'm using current information because that's all we have right now, other than our building aid. Our building aid is projected to go up because we have the $9 million project. We will only receive aid on half of that because it's being funded by the grant for half, the other half. So we will technically look to get more building aid. I'm just hopeful that it will come in within a year or two. I'm not sure of the timing yet. So I just want you to see here what that means. Moving forward, we won't be able to increase the levy cap or increase the tax levy, I'm sorry, in the future if we wanted to because of that negative drive. So, and what that does too, it could lead to more borrowing. Not only would we have to borrow more for our capital projects in the long run, because we wouldn't have money put aside into the reserves, but we could possibly, as you end up using more fund balance as you go forward, which is what we would have to do to support our budget, it could lead to borrowing for revenue anticipation notes, which is for our cash flow. So we wouldn't want that either because interest rates are high at this time. I don't know what they'll be in the future, but they're certainly high enough now. And we are looking at upcoming lean years for our state aid. We have a what if. So what if we were to go with a 1% increase? Well, this also tends to drive the tax levy cap to small increases in 25-26 and 26-27. But it will give us $540,400 in revenue for the 23-24 school year. And the estimated increase on a $300,000 home is $121. And last but not least is the 2% increase. Again, under the cap, you're under the cap by 0.8%. And it does give us some wiggle room moving forward. If we were to run into situations where our aid is cut, expenses are continuing to grow, which typically they do anyway, but not to the impact we've seen in this last year and a half. So the increase on a home at $300,000 would be $242, and we would have $1,080,800 in revenue to work with. And that could be used to assist us with maybe some in-house projects, in the capital projects as well. And I'm hopeful that the capital outlay project will pass for $250,000 because I'd like to shift money into that right away for next year because that's aided 80% in the following year. We have to get that project done. It's a good way to try replacing doors. I think that that's a good thing that we could do. It has to be health and safety related when you do a capital outlay project. So that could be, I'm thinking of Kristen's doors that are glass and people can just plow right through in the back there. So maybe that's some place we could focus. But as you said, garage doors are over 100,000 now. So we might be able to do a few doors, but at least it's something. It's money well spent.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Just for my understanding. So capital outlay project, if it's currently at 100,000, we're hoping to see it increase to 250.
Yes.
And then that would mean that if we had a project with immediate need completed within the year,
Yes.
you get 80% of that back.
Correct.
Does that work?
And we would get that in the 24-25 school year. And once it's in the budget, it's nice to be able to keep doing those mini projects each year. and you get your 80% back in the following year. It's 80,000 right now, that's fine. But it would be more helpful if it was 250,000
When will they decide on that?
when the budget's adopted by the state. So hopefully by April 1st, but we're not certain of that. So these are some of the considerations that I talked about in adopting a zero tax levy increase. Future tax levy cap calculations indicate negative amounts. Future state aid increases could be minimal at best. Rising expenses, again, we don't know how long inflation is going to last. Our appropriated fund balance has typically been $900,000 over, I'd say, the past 10 years. Is that safe to say? And in 22-23, that amount was increased to $1,250,000. So once you start appropriating more fund balance, you tend to look at fiscal stress, and the comptroller's office checks every district and determines whether or not you're on the fiscal stress alert. I don't anticipate that happening fast here, but if you do start appropriating more fund balance and using reserves, that's what will occur. We do become stressed that way. And again, we won't be able to fund capital projects as easily. We won't be able to put money into the reserve to offset the borrowing for a future capital project. And also the cash flow about earlier. And this is just a reminder of our important dates and when we need to do the adoption of the final budget on April 17th. I'll be presenting the revenue side of the budget on April 11th when we return from the break. And that's when we also anticipate the Facilities Advisory Committee to let you know what they feel we need to focus on for our next capital project. And there's our mission statement. Please, if anybody has any questions, they can reach out to any one of us there. And if any of you have any questions,
One more little question, I think. There were talks, thank you. One more question, so the building committee will present to us just the month before the adoption of the final budget.
So a week before.
A week before.
Mhm.
So quick decision making if there's something that seems to be an imperative need to get it in within the week. Right. No.
Any last questions for our principals or directors, any of us on the instructional end of the boat?
How's that roof look?
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the Assistant Superintendent for Business, Ms. Lynn Moran.
Thank you. The financial update, so we have some good news. Our FEMA application, I think I mentioned it a few months ago that we were working on it, and we finally were able to get it completed and submitted. So this is for our expenses that we incurred during COVID-19 pandemic, for items that were not budgeted, of course, and that claim comes to $571,000. I'm hopeful that we will receive some of these funds. I don't know that we'll get all of them. They tend to go over these with a fine-tooth comb, but at least we'll give it our best shot. We also received a local grant, state grant, I'm sorry, and it's for local food for schools, and it's for the school lunch fund. And these funds are only to be used for the purchase of unprocessed or minimally processed domestic and local food products. So our school lunch has already started doing that, the program, so now we can expand it. We received $27,339, so that every little bit will be helpful. So our financial reports this month are for the month of February. Our revenue received, we received our BOCES refund, that was $594,000 this year. We also received a BOCES aid payment of $403,000. And I wanted to report on our interest again, and that was $129,000. And right now, our investment account is earning around 4.7% in interest. Our expenditures in the general fund were $6 million. And our total expenses in the general fund through February 28th were 44.6 million, or 53% of our budget. And we've earned $66.6 million in revenue, or 81% of our revenue projections. We are on target for where we should be this time of year. The fireman's exemption, we wanted to talk a little bit about this. It is a new law that was put into place in December of 2022. And the board eventually must adopt this exemption as well by 2025. So it was meant to be a phase-in. And in order to adopt this, you would have to have a public hearing like any other exemptions you put into place. We currently have 50 people in our district that are receiving the current exemption. So they do get an exemption now. This will change. They will get slightly more moving forward, but they also get an income tax deduction. They're technically not supposed to get both the income tax deduction and the exemption on their taxes for their property, school taxes, but that's not ours to monitor. So the county also is not doing this exemption this year because it was so soon and they could not see what the impact would be. And that was the other thing. I couldn't run the numbers on who is receiving it and what it would impact them for yet because everything was not out in time. I know we had to get this done by January 31st, was it? March 1st.
They had to file by March 1st, which would have meant we had to adopt.
Yeah, so the timing was just not the best for us to do, but I just want to make sure that you're aware that it will have to be done, and we could do it if you would like in the fall for the following year. We just have to do it timely for the 24-25 school year. Any questions on it?
Yeah, I'd like to definitely do that in the fall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum, Instruction, Personnel, Technology Report, Mr. Jason Carter, and in for Jason Carter, Dr. Coates.
Great, thank you very much. So as I spoke of earlier, we completed this past Friday our universal pre-K lottery drawing. We videotaped the whole thing just so if anybody ever wanted to see it, we do have a copy of it. Again, we are always looking for ways to try to expand the program space. It's the biggest issue. We've maximized every corner of Scotchtown Avenue, trying to look for an additional classroom. Enrollment just doesn't allow for us in that building right now to grab another classroom, but we will always look very closely on the potential of trying to do that for the future. I also want to just talk for a moment about our kindergarten registration, our kindergarten screening. We have screening days set up for April 11th, 12th, 13th, and 14th. Families are invited to contact our district registrar regarding being enrolled and getting a time slot for their screening days. Obviously, they can go beyond that as well. We take enrollments all summer, but this gives us the best look to make sure that we have as much information possible to be able to place students most appropriately for the new year. As of this afternoon, there were 97 people signed up for the screenings, which is a good healthy number. It's up from where it was just a week ago. And what parents can expect when they come in, their children will have to complete the Dial 4 screener. Has some major concepts to it, language, gross motor, self-help, and social development. All this is used for, just for clarity, is this is just for placement. This doesn't determine any other outcome, access to anything like that. Every child obviously will have access to a free, equal, and equitable education. All that the Dial 4 is used for is just to make sure that we're grouping our classrooms appropriately so that students can learn in an optimal environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Coates. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. I need a motion for the consent agenda. Shannon and Billy. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education approves the consent agenda as presented. All those in favor? Opposed? there is old business. I need a motion to adopt Just Words curriculum at Goshen Intermediate School. I have Shannon and Tom. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education adopts the Just Words curriculum for use at Goshen Intermediate School. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I need a motion to approve the minutes. I have Brett and Shannon. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education approves the minutes for the March 6th, 2023 regular board meeting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Need a motion for 14.3. Approve agreement for special education services. Billy, Shannon. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education enters into an agreement with Liberty Resources to provide special education services for students and for the district to sub-allocate IDEA 611 and 619 funds to said providers on a per-student basis for the school year July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. All those in favor? Opposed? I need a motion to approve audit engagement letter from Nugent and Hausler, PC. Tom, Shannon. Be it resolved upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education approves the audit engagement letter dated March 16th, 2023 from Nugent and Hausler, PC, related to the external audit of fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next on the agenda, privilege of the floor. I don't see any other signups. Next on the agenda is board member issues and committee reports. I just want to say that the petitions are available for the Board of Education candidates, and those are due April 17th. Any other board member issues?
Just a couple quick questions. Do we have the next safety committee on our calendar yet?
We don't, we were waiting to finalize with the Mid-Hudson Rec, the installation of the new card swipes and camera systems. They did 2 walkthroughs last week, they're gonna do 2 more this week. Once we have that finalized, we can go ahead and schedule up with that.
We spoke about having an electric bus here, maybe possibly some of the time we can see how it's working, maybe take a ride, board members. How much longer will that bus be here?
So we had one here about a week ago. Mrs. Wells was waiting for one of the manufacturers to contact her about having the larger bus here, the 60 passenger. We'll follow up with her again to see where we are with scheduling.
And she's looking at the same manufacturer.
A different manufacturer for the larger bus. The smaller bus, she had some concerns about, but the larger bus, she feels a little bit better about the manufacturer she's pursuing.
And is there an update on our current application status for our capital improvement project that we're, I think the ball's in the state court right now?
So there's one piece that came up that they're waiting to hear back on. So in the 2000 section of the building, they have to move one of the air handlers about 5 feet. In doing that, basically what the state's saying now is we have to go through SHPO, the Historical Society. It's not in the historic part of the building, so we're hopeful that once SHPO sees this, they're just gonna say, this doesn't belong here and give it rubber stamp. Everything else, that's really the only thing holding it up at this point. The roof is approved, so the roofing project will start actually spring break, but the HVAC component, that's the last piece that we're waiting for.
Feedback from the design team is we're
We're
on
on track. We're actually in a very good place with ordering of equipment. We actually talked to them about that this week. Everything is on track for us to be able to complete most, if not all, of the installation by the end of the summer.
Excellent. And last follow-up question, any feedback from our fellow districts regarding work sessions when we might be able to view one?
So nothing locally for us. I know Washingtonville has one. I called Dr. Washington over there. He said anyone is welcome anytime to come in. He said he'll gladly give us a calendar, but nobody else responded.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Next on the agenda, I need a motion to enter into an executive session. Brett? Be it resolved, the Board of Education will enter into executive session with the intent not to reconvene the business portion of the meeting for discussions related to an impartial hearing in the employment history of a particular person or persons. All those in favor? Opposed? This concludes the business portion of the meeting. Everyone have a good evening. And board members, we'll see you in executive session.